Elisabet and James, welcome to the Ultrahabits Podcast. We don't always have three people on the show, so this is kind of, we've had a couple interviews where we've had three people on the show, and they've all gone really well. So I know that we're going to have a really dynamic conversation, and just want to tell everyone that whilst most of the guests are never in Australia, we're very lucky today because we have a full Australian interview, which is good for me because I haven't had to wake up super early. So Elisabet and James, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having us. Super excited.
So, yeah, me too. So, Rachel from the, Rachel is a great connector of people. She was at the Australian Graduate School of Management where I did my MBA, and she's always been connecting people. And she obviously introduced us to each other. I had done some research on you guys on the product, and I was like, yeah, I'm going to have to get you guys on the show. So, you guys have created this product, which, from what I understand, helps people regulate and breathe better. It really kind of helps people deal with their stress and anxiety, and we'll dive into that product and kind of the whole startup piece because I think that's going to be really interesting for the audience. But before we do, maybe Elisabet, I'll hand it over to you. Where and how was the idea for this product born?
So the idea was born basically from my passion for breathwork. So when I was younger, I had a severe slip disc in my lower vertebra, so I couldn't walk for over a year, and I was not fully grown, so they couldn't operate. So that meant that I was bedridden for over a year and just obviously in chronic pain. And from that, I developed stress and anxiety and depression. But that led me into also researching alternative solutions to fix those problems. And that's where I stumbled into breathwork and mindfulness practices. And that really just transformed my life and helped me overcome all these issues. And I've always been super passionate about incorporating that into my life through fitness and just through daily practices. But I've always struggled with kind of incorporating it into my professional life when I feel like I mostly need it. So before stressful meetings or before giving presentations or something like that, that's where breathwork is the most kind of strong delivery. And that's where I kind of that's where the idea came from, somehow bridging the gap between incorporating breathwork into your daily life basically.
So Elisabet, with that, were your parents quite supportive of alternative practices, or was this something that you kind of took upon yourself as a young person, because that's not necessarily a normal thing to do?
I would say my mom is very pro natural healing and stuff like that. And I obviously was put on strong medication, strong pain medication in the beginning, and then the body just wore off after a time. And I just had higher dosage. And I was 14 at the time, and that just to me didn't feel right to do that. So I just did a lot of research. I've always read a lot of books, so I just really put my mind to finding some other solutions, and that's where I stumbled on breathwork. And I would never have thought that could have such an impact on your pain, especially just doing diaphragmatic breathing, which basically means breathing deeply into your stomach. Because I learned that through the back pain, I was just breathing through here, kind of super shallow into the chest. And that's why I had so much stress and anxiety and depression. So that kind of all correlated. So super interesting learning. So I'm today grateful that the experience happened. But at the time it was not the best time.
And so Elisabet, you grew up in Iceland, right? And I mean, I know that a lot of us have ideas of Iceland. I actually heard that Iceland's actually pretty green. I think my mom told me that. And, we watched obviously the movie with, I think Will Ferrell, the comedy when he's in Iceland. So we've got, some of us have some formed views of Iceland, but a lot of us don't really know the reality. What's the culture like there in terms of, alternative practices, and what's the typical kind of culture in terms of medicine in Iceland?
Good question. Too many people are definitely on, like, I don't know, antidepressive and stuff like that. And that's mainly because we have so little sunlight. During winter, we have like 3 hours sunlight or something like that. But I still think people are very like strong-willed and just strong people in general. Like we have had like strongest men in the world and a lot of like people that have won the CrossFit Games, Icelandic, and like the football team that we have, and just so many strong-willed people, even though we're only like 360,000. So I feel like, yeah, our main thing, like we've survived on this isolated island for like hundreds of years. And we've just developed this thick skin for life in general, I feel like.
Yeah, that's interesting. And we'll unpack that. Like I've got a, funny relationship to vitamin D, and I definitely feel when I have a lack of sun. I also really am a believer in embracing the cold, and I'm sure that you have your view on kind of cold ice baths and cold kind of plunges and things like that, and we'll get into that in terms of how that relates to breath. But James, over to you. So you're a good old Australian. You're a local, and in terms of your relationship with breath work, what's your history? Like, how did you come into this work?
Well, really, it was Elisabet who got me into breath work and optimal breathing. I've always been interested in health and fitness. I wrote a book called The Wellbeing Revolution about 10 years ago. And since then, I've always been trying to optimize, like figuring out how I can be at my best and how I can help others to be at their best. And so I met Elisabet, and she recommended a book called Breathe by James Nestor, which I sort of resisted. And she recommended it a few times. And I was like, yeah, all right, I'll read it eventually. And when I read it, I actually couldn't put the book down. It's an incredible story about James Nestor, who couldn't breathe properly because of the shape of his mouth, based on his lifestyle practices throughout his life. And he tells a story about the journey he goes on to improve his breath and how that improves all of his health outcomes. Like he had chronic asthma, he had sleep apnea, he couldn't sleep properly, like just all these stressful things were happening in his life, and he fixed those with optimal breathing practices. So I read that book and I was hooked on this whole opportunity around optimal breathing. And we've done a real deep dive, and we've seen that a large majority of stress and anxiety that people experience can be linked back to the way they breathe. Like obviously we can't affect the stressful stimuli that happens in our lives, but we can always affect how we react to it. And it's been pretty crazy, like since understanding that, to see that things happen and we tend to stop breathing properly. So for example, I've got a toddler and she's going through a tantrum stage at the moment, and I keep noticing, like I stop breathing properly when she has her tantrums. It's like we go into fight or flight and we breathe into the top of our chest instead of into our diaphragms. And then it becomes a perpetuating circle where, because we're not breathing properly, we get stressed. And because we're stressed, we're not breathing properly. And so every person I know suffers from stress in one way or another. Like we're all incredibly busy. We've got too many emails, too many notifications, meetings to go to. It's just like life's got crazy. And so we feel like there's a really good opportunity here to remind people to breathe properly. And it's pretty simple stuff, really. I mean, the most studies have been around coherence breathing and the benefits of that. And coherence breathing really is just slowing your breath so that you're only doing 5.5 breaths per minute. So 5.5 seconds inhale, 5.5 seconds exhale. And the benefits of that are just unreal. Like most people will do that for 2 minutes and they'll just completely feel different in their bodies.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I have, I've had a lot of Navy SEALs on the show, and I've got a good relationship with Mark Devine, who created SEAL Fit out of San Diego, and he's a big advocate of box breathing, and it's something that I've started to kind of implement to really calm myself down and move into the kind of the parasympathetic space. And I really relate to what you just said. I mean, I wake up quite early and I start just hammering my tasks, right? I was on emails at 5:30 this morning, and I find as soon as I open my laptop or as soon as I move into my day, I just kind of am in a all out kind of panic attack. It sometimes seems, right? Like I'm just trying to move as quickly and get as much shit done as possible. And within that, I'm not necessarily breathing. And, and I think it's super, super relevant. So how did you guys actually meet?
We actually met through an incubator program by a venture capital fund called Antler. And so we both wanted to start a business and have both always been interested in building a business, but didn't have a co-founder. And so Antler basically matched us together. And we discovered pretty quickly we had a passion for health and wellness, and Elisabet's passion for breathwork sort of brought me along the journey as well. And since then, we've been developing a product that is basically a wearable that tracks stress. So it sits on your wrist. It looks like a bracelet. So it's a tech product, but it looks more like jewelry, and it tracks stress. And so throughout the day, when people become stressed, it gently squeezes their wrists to remind them to inhale, and then releases to remind them to exhale. So the value proposition is, even when you're aware that you should be breathing properly and that breathing properly improves your stress, we still forget it. And so the product is going to help people to remind them, you're in a stressful situation right now. It could be like you're doing a presentation that's important to you, or it could be your toddler's having a tantrum. It could be anything really. And it will just gently remind you to breathe properly throughout the day when those things occur.
Yeah. And within that, like, do you, so the device is letting me know that I'm not breathing properly. Is it about taking a time out and going, like, removing yourself from the situation, or is it really just connecting in the moment and practicing like deep breath? Like, what's the view there?
The problem we're really trying to solve is helping people in the moment. So we feel like there's a lot of products out there that can help you after the fact. So you might download Calm or Headspace on your phone and go and do a quick meditation or a breathing exercise. Or even if you've got like a Fitbit or a Whoop or an Apple Watch, they'll tell you at the end of the day that you're being stressed. We feel like that's not really helpful. We want to help people in the moment, because that's when you can actually affect the stress and you can improve the stress.
Yeah, and I agree with that. I think like real-time management is really where we develop the habits and we create that real-time awareness. I do think that a lot of the products out there are quite post hoc, right? And that doesn't really serve us, because in the moment we forget, right? And I think that it's really, really, we don't have to remove ourselves from a situation and do a deep meditation. We can just simply connect with our body, connect with our breath, take a moment and move on. I noticed that the product is quite like Scandinavian in nature, right? Like it's pretty minimalistic. It's quite nice. It's not necessarily athletic. And I think that there's a reason maybe that you guys have kind of gone down that path. This product is like, who's your typical user? Like, who are you guys kind of, thinking that this product is going to be relevant for?
Elisabet has designed the product, and we've used the Nordic, Icelandic design style to sort of create a jewelry. We found that particularly a lot of females don't like to wear the big clunky Apple Watch or Fitbit or whatever tech product, because, like, firstly, it sits big on their wrist on a lot of occasions. So, for example, my Apple Watch, I feel like fits my wrist pretty nicely, but my wife feels like it's just really clunky on her wrist. So that's one part of it. And then the other part is we feel like there's a big market out there who live busy lifestyles and like busy professionals that are interested in health and interested in improving their stress, but they're not like fitness freaks. So they don't want to wear a Whoop, or they don't want to fork out the money for an Apple Watch. So we feel like there's a sweet spot of people who are busy professionals. Maybe they do Pilates or yoga. They're into exercise, but they're not running marathons, and like not at that level where they need a Whoop. So we feel like that's sort of where we're heading to go.
Do you feel that this product will be mainly worn by women?
It's a tough question because we haven't actually launched it in market yet, but we've done a lot of studies and surveys, and we've found that people it's about 50-50 of males to females registering interest. But we also find that more like typically men that we're interviewing already have a wearable compared to females. So we feel like perhaps there's a bigger market of females who want a really nicely designed product that doesn't look clunky on their wrist.
So no doubt you're now entering the realm of go to market, and your stress levels would no doubt be increasing, and I'm sure the product is super relevant for you guys. Like, how has the journey been in terms of just the startup space, James? Like, how have you found the process, like the good, the bad, the ugly? Because I know a lot of our audience are, entrepreneurs on the journey, or they're looking to become. Like, what have you experienced thus far in your journey?
Yeah, good question. I think like there's so many ways my brain's going at the moment. So firstly, I guess it's always a really tough uphill challenge to get a completely new product to market, and particularly because ours is hardware. So we firstly need to like engage engineers and industrial designers to build the product, and then we've got to go through the manufacturing phase. So like that's all a challenge, but we take a lot of confidence in seeing that other companies have done it before, and there's a strategy and system that you can follow to get there. We've been incredibly excited by the feedback we're getting. And I think whenever there's a roadblock that sort of comes along, we remind ourselves that people are telling us they really need this product in their lives. So I guess every day is like we get some really good feedback, and then we hit a challenge, and we just need to keep pushing through that and continually, like every day +1 until we get to having the product in market.
Elisabet, how has, it's a stressful endeavor, no doubt, right? Like, it's challenging. Every day presents a challenge. Like, how have you maintained your practice and your self-care through the process? I mean, I know, like, how have you ensured that you're breathing correctly? Like, because I think sometimes even myself, like, I talk about health and well-being all the time. I'm having conversations with some of the best minds on the planet, and I'll walk out of an interview and get completely crazy based on something that's just happened, right? Like, it's not always easy to kind of live what we're actually doing, right? So, or talking about. So, Elisabet, how have you found that, your life and your habits and the stuff that you were doing in terms of self-care, have you been able to maintain that through this process of the startup journey?
That's a good question. That has definitely been more challenging than I expected. I've always been very structured when it comes to my self-care and just personal life and health and wellness. I always try to build healthy habits. I exercise regularly. But now definitely, like, it's hard to practice what we're preaching just because we're under so much pressure and just time pressure and everything. But I just like structure my day fairly well. I think I take time in the mornings to either meditate or do breath work, and I try to exercise in the morning, and I just kind of try to structure my day to kind of uphold those healthy habits. Also, like James and I, we've also bonded over, we're both really passionate about just optimizing your lives. So we like doing monthly challenges. So last month we both did no caffeine and no chocolate, and I walked like 10,000 steps a day. So I don't know. And then we just keep each other accountable throughout the day. Like, have you gotten your steps in? Like, how's your sugar craving? Stuff like that. So yeah, we just, I don't know. We, push each other forward and help each other out to maintain our habits and healthy lifestyle.
And I think a big part of the challenges is, like, we know starting a business is going to be tough. And like already this week, we've probably got 10 no's from potential people we're pitching. So we know it's going to be tough. And so we're trying to, I guess, steel our minds or callous our minds and build resilience. And so we feel that by doing the challenges, not only is it a great way to bond, but it's also like we're doing tough stuff every day. And we know the more tough stuff we do, the easier everything else is hopefully going to get, which it feels like it is.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I was talking to my wife, who's going on an entrepreneurial journey, and like it's completely foreign for her. And she was getting stressed out about the leases or something yesterday. The agents are super like lackadaisical. And, I told her, I said, hun, like, you've got to pace yourself because you're pushing and prodding every day. Tomorrow you're going to be pushing, prodding, pulling, yelling, like there's always movement. And if you kind of like are getting overly stuck to issues on a daily basis, you're going to come unstuck really quickly, right? So I think it's that ability to kind of move forward, do the necessary needful things to kind of get the results you need to without like attaching too much to the actual individual circumstances, right? To the extent that we start to dramatize it and get it overly emotional or kind of, start overthinking things. Elisabet, you had talked about something interesting, caffeine. Now, like for me to get off of coffee would be interesting. It would be an interesting challenge, and I've thought about it before. But how do things like caffeine impact breathing, and like what things out there do we know really adversely impact our breathing?
Caffeine obviously can be very stress-inducing if you overuse it. And that can dramatically impact your life, like impact your breath in the sense of like you can then just be in constant state of fight or flight during the day, and it's just you, and then you get tired because you're in that state for too long, and then you get more caffeine and you get more stressed, and then your breath just becomes more shallow, and it's just like this loop that's ongoing.
Do you think that breath work in terms of calming us down and stress relief or release is more impactful than meditation?
I think it's like just it very much correlates to each other. I feel like mindfulness and breathwork is very much like a similar practice in the sense of like you are focusing on being super present, focusing on your breath. And at least when I do meditations, I mostly always do breathing meditation. So I focus on my breath, try not to control it, and that's how I kind of like shift my mind state into this meditative state. So I feel like it's very correlated practice, to be honest.
James, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with Elisabet. I think it's very correlated. It feels like meditation is something that people set aside a time for to do once a day, whereas breathing is something that you can focus on all day, every day, no matter what you're doing. And that's what we're really trying to remind people, is that when you stop thinking about it and you're not conscious of it, you'll go back to your habitual way of breathing, which typically is not healthy. So having a meditation practice can strengthen your mind to remind you throughout the day to continually breathe. But yeah, I think they both work hand in hand. And like, I think exercise is really important as well, particularly if you're exercising in the mornings, because it allows you to get fresh air into your lungs and sort of sets you up for the day. And I definitely find if I don't exercise in the morning, I feel stressed later on in the day. And I know it's got a lot to do with breathing and the amount of oxygen that my body's had in the morning. So I think that can really set you up in the morning as well.
I'm friends with a guy in Victoria, a guy named Mark Kluwer, who was a friend of Wim Hof. He's a friend of Wim Hof. He's like the Australian version of Wim Hof, and he is really into breath work, but also is really into the cold, right? Like a lot of ice baths, a lot of cold plunges, a lot of cold therapy. James, what's the correlation? Like, why are these people connecting cold and breath work? Like, what's the correlation there?
This is something we speak about a lot, and we've both been doing ice baths together at varying temperatures, and we quite enjoy it more so from a challenge perspective and understanding that the benefits are really good and there's a lot of great science. But the biggest thing is every time you want to, like no matter how long you've been doing ice baths for, it's always really hard to get in that first time. So it's a big challenge. The correlation is that when you first hit that water, the cold water, your body immediately goes into stress. And there's different stresses that are good and bad. Like, for example, exercise is a good stress, ice bath is a good stress. But like immediately you stop breathing the way you were breathing as soon as your skin hits that cold water. And so the correlation is that it's a reminder that if you breathe optimally and slowly and deeply and through your diaphragm when you hit the cold water, then you can control your body. And so it's a constant reminder that you're in control. Like no matter what's coming at you, focus on your breath and you can work your way through it.
Yeah, it's a very, very good answer. Have you guys done much digging around and kind of research into breathing in sport, like breathing during sport, and kind of how to optimize that? James, I know you're a runner, and I think that you're getting into the world of ultra endurance, so welcome. So, what's your research and your view on that piece?
Yeah, it's a great question. Like, there's so many different usages of the way you breathe depending on what you're doing. So, for example, when LeBron James is standing at the free throw line and his team's down by 1 point with a second to go, he's going to breathe differently to how a marathon runner's breathing. So, at the moment, I'm training for a 100K ultra, like you mentioned, and I'm a really big fan of Patrick McEwen and the Oxygen Advantage business that he's built. There's a really good book called The Oxygen Advantage. And they talk about, firstly, always breathe through your nose when you're running, because that allows your body to create more red blood cells and recover quicker. It also helps you to get more oxygen into your body. It's extremely hard, and it sort of replicates high altitude training. So if anyone out there is a runner and they haven't tried breathing through your nose, give it a go. You'll probably find that on your first try, your heart rate will be about 30 beats per minute, or 30 beats per minute, higher than it usually is. And so Oxygen Advantage talks about trying to get as little oxygen in as you can and getting used to the feeling of higher carbon dioxide in the blood. It's pretty crazy stuff. And once you get into the world of it, it just like evolves over and over. And basically the point is to get less breath. Whereas someone like LeBron James, who's on the free throw line, he'd be focusing on slowly and deeply breathing, and particularly focusing on a slow exhale, because that's what we find lowers the heart rate, decreases the fight or flight, and gets you feeling more relaxed. There's so many different use cases, but I think when you're looking at clutch moments, pressure moments, it's always about slow it down and go deep through your nose, whereas it can be completely different for other types of exercises.
I wanted to add to the sports and breathing. So that, I would say that there's a misconception about breathing exercises, that they're only useful for relaxation or stress reduction. But I would say that breathing exercises have been shown to have a wide range of physical and mental health benefits, including improved cardiovascular health, enhanced athletic performance, and improved cognitive function. So yeah, it's just people kind of only look at breathwork as this mindfulness practice when in fact it can be really, really, really beneficial in improving your fitness and health levels. Just wanted to add that.
Yeah, for sure. And I wanted to ask you, Elisabet, when you're meditating, do you breathe through your mouth or your nose?
I always breathe through my nose. No one should ever breathe through their mouth. So, but it depends on what I'm doing. When I'm meditating, I always breathe through my nose. But when I'm doing different breathing exercises, like pursed lip breathing exercise, for example, I breathe slowly through, exhale slowly through my mouth. But in general, everyone should be breathing through their nose, even though I think 30 to 40% of adults breathe through their mouth, and that has just detrimental effect on their overall health and well-being, and it's correlated to stress and anxiety and other health issues like respiratory issues and stuff like that.
My wife used to call me a mouth breather at night and sleep, and I started to shift that through kind of closing my mouth and forcing it shut, and I feel that I'm breathing more through my nose. Interestingly enough, it seems like most of the women I know breathe through their nose, but the men in their lives breathe through their mouth. I don't know if there's any studies on kind of that and to confirm that. But are there times, I guess the first question is, what's the benefit of breathing through your nose, and what's the downside of breathing through your mouth? Maybe Elisabet, I'll hand that to you, and then James, you can piggyback on that.
So when we breathe through our nose, we have tiny little hairs that basically filters and warms the air. So it humidifies the air. So it's when it enters your lungs, it's easier for your lungs to absorb oxygen and increase blood flow throughout the body. So this is really helpful for respiratory function. And it's also helpful for just keeping, unwanted particles and bacteria out of your body. Because when you breathe through your mouth, it just goes unfiltered straight into your lungs. So it's more work for your lungs to, overcome that and get rid of all those particles that they don't want. So yeah, it also like when you breathe through your nose, it basically helps slow down the breath and deepen it, which can help to activate the diaphragm and promote relaxation. And then on the other hand, if you're a mouth breather, then obviously you're probably breathing too quickly, and then you're more likely to be in a state of fight or flight and more likely to have stress and anxiety and respiratory issues like asthma and bronchitis and other issues like that.
James, you want to add anything to that?
I think what Elisabet said's spot on. The only thing I would add is the nose has tiny mucous membranes, which are really tiny particles that trap any antibodies trying to get into the system when you breathe. And so there's studies to show that people who are breathing through their nose are far less likely to get sinus problems, but also to catch things like the common cold.
I've recently got into, researching and studying about our nervous system. I was introduced to polyvagal theory by a friend of mine, and, have come to believe that a lot of the stuff going on for me and others, in terms of stress and our reactions are held in the body, in the nervous system. What is the link between our breath and our nervous system, James?
So on this question, I don't know any studies here. I haven't really looked into it too deeply, but I can definitely share an anecdote that I experienced about a month ago. And I mentioned to you before when Elisabet mentioned to read James Nestor's Breathwork, I had a bit of resistance. I also had a bit of resistance when I went to this breath class, which was holotropic breathwork. And basically what that is breathing really quickly in and out for an extended period of time. And that increases the carbon dioxide in your body. And the whole idea of it is you get to a state where you start to let out trauma. And so I'm pretty skeptical about these things, but I thought I'd give it a go. And so I was lying down, breathing pretty heavily for I think we'd been going for about half an hour. And all of a sudden I lost complete control of my body. And so my shoulders are like waving around and my chest is going up and down and like my head's moving, my legs are moving, my arms are going everywhere. And I just thought to myself, I've got absolutely no control over this, but like it's happening and it just continued to happen. And 5 minutes of that sort of passed. And then all of a sudden tears just started coming out of my eyes. Like I haven't cried like this ever, I don't think, just like coming out of my eyes so quickly. And I didn't know why or what was happening, but it just felt good. And the whole idea behind holotropic breathwork is we hold this trauma in our bodies. And the guy who was running the class, so I highly recommend Johan Egberts from Breathless Expeditions. He was talking about how, like, obviously we're all holding things in our bodies, and typically people go and talk about it, like they might see a therapist or a counselor, and he feels that we're just sort of accessing like only the tip of the iceberg when we're doing that, because we've got all this, call it trauma, I don't know, like whatever you want to call it, we've got these things deep in our body. And I was skeptical of that. But after doing the class, we finished up and I've never felt so light and so relaxed, like ever, or probably since I was a little kid. And I definitely believe that there's something that's sort of come out of me and through that experience, call it trauma or whatever. But I feel like there's definitely something here. I don't know the studies yet, so I'm keen to continue looking into it a bit further and hopefully some studies can start coming out, but it feels to me just anecdotally that there's a really big link here.
I mean, I think even just at a high level perspective, we would all agree that, deep breath helps us relax. It helps us move away from fight or flight to more of a stable place. I think that there would be, we could agree on that. And I'm certain that there's information and studies that would support that. I find that interesting. Elisabet, what's your take on what James's experience was?
Yeah, I actually had I went to the same class last week, I think, with Johannes. Amazing experience. And especially like I've done like holotropic breathing before, but never in a group of people. And it was just an amazing experience. Like everyone just having this like out of body almost experience or like altered state. yeah, it's just, and then in my case, like I just started uncontrollably crying, and I just felt so much release from my like chest and my body in general that I don't know, it would probably take me years of therapy work to get rid of that thing. So it's just crazy how you can like just access your body, and your body's just storing all these, you know, old trauma and emotions and experiences, and you can just release it through the way that you inhale and exhale. It's fascinating. But I also want to talk about like when it comes to the parasympathetic nervous system. So there's something called like breathing, thinking, and feeling loop, and that's something that Stuart Sandeman talks about in Breathe In, Breathe Out. So it basically talks about the way that we breathe affects the way that we think and feel, but also like the other opposite. So basically, the way that we think and feel affects the way that we breathe. And when we're feeling like when our feelings and thoughts are matched, we are in a state of being. So let's say, for example, that we have anxious thoughts and we feel anxious. That means that our breathing will change, and we will have like short breath, and our heart rate will raise. And there's only two ways to break a state of being, either by one, changing your thought pattern, which is really challenging when you're having anxious thoughts. Like it's easier said than done, than that just telling yourself like, oh, like just think about, you know, calming things. So it's either changing your thoughts or it's changing the way that you breathe. So if you start breathing slowly and controlled, that will signal your body that you're not stressed anymore. So you start feeling calm, and then calm thoughts follow. So it's like this feedback loop, basically. And you can kind of hack your body and hack the system by just changing your breath, which is fascinating.
Yeah, I think, and James, you touched upon it earlier, and Elisabet, I think you just nailed it. I think a lot of Western psychology is on the basis of meeting our psychology with other thoughts. So we try to alter our state by thinking or positive psychology, which when we're really in the horrors doesn't necessarily work. And I think kind of altering our being through our physiology is a much more accessible way, hence why I think exercise is so great. But I think movement and kind of accessing a shift through our breath, like that's always accessible, right? We can't always self-talk or self-navigate our way out of psychological issues. And in fact, it creates duality many times where you start to kind of like you're using your inner voice and narrative to try to shift a narrative that isn't serving you, and it can become actually worse. And in many ways, it can fortify the negativity. So I 100% agree with what you've just said. So let's move back to the business. The business is called Anda, right? So it's Elisabet, I'm assuming that's Icelandic?
It is. It's Icelandic, and it means breath. The name is Anda, and it's Icelandic for breath. And I just really wanted to kind of like, I don't know, keep some of my Icelandic heritage into the business. And I wanted to like, just like James mentioned earlier, we wanted to be kind of like Nordic inspired and very sleek, and kind of like also incorporate the mindset from the Icelandic people. So that's why we, chose the name Anda.
No, it's very good. I went, and I've looked at the product. I think you guys are going to really change the game in terms of the market that you're focusing on. I think there's really a need and a requirement, James, to your point, of people in the office that aren't necessarily ultra endurance athletes that don't walk around with a Garmin and measure their, physical output on a daily basis in terms of exercise. So where are you guys out in the process in terms of launch? How are you going to go to market? Is it going to be, sold through e-commerce? Like, what's the plan there? Have you guys worked through that?
Yeah, for sure. We've been spending a lot of time on this. So the plan for us, where we're at right now, is we're still designing the product. And so we've engaged some mechatronics engineers, electronical engineers, mechanical engineers, and industrial designers to actually build the product and then manufacture the product. So that's the process we're going through now. But in terms of go-to-market, we're going to do a crowdfunding campaign to launch it into market. And so there'll be an opportunity for anyone who's interested to buy the product to buy it with a big discount to start off with. And so if people are interested in that, they can jump on our website and just leave their email, and we'll let everyone know when that happens. But definitely it's going to be a direct-to-consumer business, just selling through e-commerce.
And are you guys going to have, like, is the plan to give data access to the user, or like a dashboard? Is that the play there?
Yeah, definitely. So all data will be owned by the user. So basically, we'll have an accompanying app where people can come in and firstly tell us, like, what are the things they're trying to improve. So it could be stress and anxiety. It might be they want to sleep better, or it could be something like they've got high blood pressure, diabetes, etc. And our algorithms will help figure out the best ways to breathe to improve those symptoms throughout the day. And then as time goes, we'll determine when they're getting stressed. So at what points throughout the day is the individual getting stressed, and then help to provide ways to improve that, and constant reminders and training videos and resources to take control of their breath and breathe better throughout the day.
I just wanted to say, yeah, we kind of want to stay away from just giving, like, I don't know, stats on people's health. So studies have shown that actually getting like health on stats on your like sleep and stress levels, etc., is more stress inducing than anything else. So we really want to make sure that we give people actionable data and more like, I don't know, uplifting data and insights into their health and how the band has helped them with, you know, their stress levels, etc. Not just like giving them like, oh, last night you slept like shit, you're gonna have a terrible day, good luck, hopefully you sleep better tomorrow. Like that's not really the route that we want to go down.
Yeah, that's interesting. And also I think, you know, a lot of that information, you know, it's questionable as to how relevant and accurate. Like I you know, particularly the sleep information, like I don't necessarily know how accurate that is, and I think people are forming their ideas about their physical health based on that data. It could be quite tricky. And I think, you know, coming in with a bit more of an optimistic outlook, really looking to kind of be positive in how you engage with the users, is going to be really good and great. And I think we're all going to be looking forward to the launch of the product. Now, we are going to start to land this plane, but before we go, I'm going to ask you both one question. And James, maybe I'll start with you. What's one habit that our audience could engage in to improve their breath?
I think I'll sort of package this up into one answer, but the first part is to just remind yourself to breathe slowly and deeply whenever you catch yourself. And so, like, it's one thing to be aware that you need to breathe better, but it's then the other thing to remind yourself throughout the day. And there's going to be hundreds of moments throughout the day when you'll just completely forget. So just try to keep reminding yourself. And the simplest way I'd recommend people to breathe is, firstly, always breathe through your nose. Secondly, slow and deep into your belly. So through the nose, as slow as you possibly can, that feels comfortable, and make sure you're breathing into your belly, which activates the diaphragm instead of into the top of your chest.
It's an excellent answer. Elisabet?
Yeah, I would say try to kind of like incorporate breathwork into your life. So start small. Incorporating a new habit is always challenging, and it can be overwhelming. So stay consistent. Just begin with like a few minutes of breathwork each day, and gradually kind of increase the duration as you become more comfortable with the practice. Be consistent and find a technique that works for you. So if that is like doing breathwork in the morning, or like, I don't know, 5 minutes before each meeting, or after lunch or before lunch or something like that. And I also recommend using reminders just to stay consistent with your practice. And another thing that I want to mention is, I think it's really good to join a community, just to kind of like join a community of people that are also practicing breathwork, that can really help you stay motivated and accountable. And James and I have actually launched a community on our website. So that's for everyone that's into breathwork, or you can be a seasoned practitioner, or you're just starting out. So we're just creating this community where people can come together, share their experience, motivate each other to incorporate breathwork into their life. And yeah, it would be great if people will join that community with us.
And James, where can people join that community?
Our website is breathewithanda.com. And to access the community, there's a little menu there with community, or it's breathewithanda.com/community.
Excellent. That was going to be my next question, which Elisabet, led us into. So that was great. Where you can be found. So we will have that in the show notes as well. So anyone that wants to go and look up the business and join the community can do so. I want to thank you both so very much for your time today. It was really enlightening. All the best with the launch of the product. We will all be watching and rooting, and no doubt you guys will be successful.
Awesome. Thanks so much, RJ. Great chatting with you.
Thank you, RJ. Been a pleasure.